Cześć! Witaj na kanale. Mam na imię Rob. Jestem z Anglii. Yes, my name is Rob, and I'm from England, and I've been exploring Poland now for over a year. Now, a year ago, I looked at a video about how Poland was becoming Europe's next big superpower. Since then, I have been to Poland quite a few times: Wrocław, Gdansk, Warszawa. I've just come back from Poznan, so I've seen a little bit more firsthand. So I've got another video on a similar theme about becoming Poland, Europe's next big superpower. So let's see if I can learn anything new and relate to it a little bit more.
This is the classic stereotype of Poland. A gray, poor, post-communist country with nothing to offer but cheap, unqualified labor. But this stereotype is no longer true.
So I can straight away say that spot on. This is a stereotype that still exists. People in the UK will still look at Poland and say to me, "Why are you going to Poland?" Like, and without realizing what Poland is now. Yes, you still see the communist kind of buildings and blocks, but that's because have already been built. They're not just going to knock everything down. But it's become so modern. It's awesome. But parts of the world still have that stereotype about Poland being a part of the Eastern Bloc. That's true.
And Poland of today looks more like this. In the past 30 years, Poland went through an incredible transformation, growing more than any
That's
other
Warsaw.
economy in Europe, and faster than Asian tigers like Singapore, South Korea, or Taiwan. Today, Poland is emerging as a major technological hub. The Polish economy might overtake the UK by 2030, and after
Probably.
years of suffering from a massive brain drain, highly skilled Poles are now coming back home. And it goes way beyond the economy, as Poland is building one of the most powerful militaries in Europe, and quickly becoming one of the most influential European countries. As all of these changes continue to pick up pace, it's getting impossible to ignore Poland's growing importance. But there is still one thing that could destroy the entire Polish miracle. A threat not from the outside, but from within. So how did Poland manage to become Europe's biggest success story? Why is it doing so much better than everyone else? And what is the challenge threatening to end everything that it has achieved?
Let's find out.
This is the rise of Poland.
I can literally see the building where I stayed.
But to understand why Poland's transformation is such a big deal, we need to understand where it started from. In the 20th century, after becoming the first country to be invaded by Nazi Germany and losing 20% of its population in World War II, Poland became part of the Eastern Bloc, as one of the Soviet-controlled satellite states. Like in the rest of the Eastern Bloc, the 40 years of communism were times of deep economic isolation.
We've learned a lot about that on this channel, my robreacts channel, and also on the Charlie and Rob YouTube channel, where I go to these places. I've been to Poland, the Uprising Museum, for example, in Warszawa. We've learned about it all. So if you are interested, go to Charlie and Rob on YouTube and check out my vlogs there for sure, because I've learned so much about this and the history.
Stagnation and overall hopelessness. Poland had to import the Soviet system of centrally planned economy, where state owned almost everything. Private businesses were mostly non-existent, and since they were basically a Soviet colony, the Polish economy was subservient to interests of the Soviet Union, and forced to make, buy, and sell whatever Moscow wanted it to, whether it made economic sense or not. As a result, the centrally planned economy was deeply dysfunctional and mismanaged, crippled by constant shortages of basic goods and lack of resources.
I just want to say, sorry for interrupting, but so I've just come back from Poznan, and actually you can see some of the good things that the Soviet regime did, and some of the bad things, obviously. So, it's like I did a video that will be coming up next week called at Lake Malta, where the Soviets took control and they wanted to prove that communism was better than capitalism. And therefore they built these big projects, and Lake Malta is this man-made lake from damming the river. And then they've got all these leisure facilities. They've got the rowing and everything. They've got the skis. They've got so much there because it was trying to prove that they can give everyone all this leisure time. It means they can give all these people work. So there was some positives. That's all I'm going to say. There was some positives.
The communist regimes of Eastern Europe finally fell in 1989, and Poland became free and independent. It emerged from behind the Iron Curtain as one of the poorest countries in Europe, with highly dysfunctional infrastructure and public services, and with basically no experience with capitalism and participating in a global economy. The average salary was 10 times lower than in Germany, and the country was struggling with hyperinflation. In other words, it wasn't a country you would bet on to become a major success. But skip 30 years ahead into the future, and that's exactly what happened. So, how did Poland do it? From 1992, Poland managed to grow consecutively for almost 3 decades, achieving the longest period of growth in modern European history. Now, not many countries are able to do that, and the reason is that usually when they find a successful strategy, they tend to stick to it long after it stops working. But Poland, so far, managed to find a different growth strategy for each of the 3 decades, which allowed it to grow so fast for so long. Starting in the early 1990s, its main challenge, like in every other post-communist country, was how to transition from a centralized, state-owned economy to a capitalist one. In most countries, these transitional reforms were in one way or another quite problematic. Either they took too long, or they became pretty corrupt, and much of the state wealth was transferred into hands of a few wealthy oligarchs who got rich because of their political connections. Poland, on the other hand, managed this transition arguably better than others. It transitioned to capitalism quickly, but privatized most of the state-owned companies slowly, and a few years later than most of its neighbors, after the chaos calmed down, and after it became a little bit harder to steal everything. Thanks to that, it became pretty much the only post-communist country without an economy dominated by oligarchs, and without an economic crash in the 1990s. But
it's very true, because we went to Tirana last year in Albania, and that used to be a communist country, and it's not anymore, but it's almost what Poland was 30, 40 years ago. It's relatively poor, lots of unfinished building works, and so that sort of shows the difference. You know, Poland is booming, it's modernizing and everything, whereas countries that have come out of communism, such as Albania and things, it's less productive and it's less positive than Poland has seen.
despite the good start in the early 2000s, this wasn't enough anymore in order to grow, and so the next phase was about globalization. In 2004, Poland joined the European Union and the open European market with a free movement of goods and services. Without any barriers between Poland and the rest of Europe, it made sense for Western European companies to move their manufacturing over to Poland, where they had a large and a very cheap pool of workers at their disposal.
Spot on, right? So everyone says about China being a global superpower now, which yes, it probably is. Why is it becoming why is it, or is it becoming a global superpower? Well, it's becoming that because cheap labor, the cost of living is technically cheaper as well. So that's similar to what Poland was. Now, granted, you're still not going to make as much in Poland than you are, for example, in the UK or the States. And the cost of things are rising. But in the early 2000s, you know, it was cheap labor. So it was basically China, but closer, if you know what I mean. Therefore, transport's cheaper and everything like that. So actually, it's similar to China, in a sense.
And while these companies kept most of the profit, Poland got enough out of it to keep growing at a pretty fast pace.
Taxes
and joining the
things.
EU brought another major benefit, since one of its key principles is redistribution of money from wealthier member states to the less developed ones, in order to balance the wealth disparity across the Union. After joining, the Eastern European states started to receive a lot of money, and Poland managed to use them to build and improve everything from roads to universities.
That so links, though, doesn't it, with what they were talking about earlier? Yes, the European Union is helping, which is fantastic. That's what it's about. It's about lifting everyone up, right? Rather than just the select few. But in this case, Poland have been able to spend that money mostly pretty wisely. It's not just gone to the people at the top. Whereas certain other countries that may have joined the EU that have come from poorer situations, it may not have gone to the right people, and therefore the money may not have been spent for the right causes. So that's very, very good point.
And again, in a lot more efficient way than in many other Eastern European countries. But that can still only take you as far, and many countries following a similar trajectory eventually fall into the so-called middle-income trap. If your economy is based on providing cheap labor for foreign companies, you can only grow
Get
to
so
a certain
far.
level. And if you can't offer anything else apart from that, and you don't have any major companies of your own, you're stuck. But so far, Poland seems to be avoiding that. 15 years ago, foreign companies were coming in to hire low-skilled and low-paid workers for menial labor. But today, they're coming because Poland has one of the largest pools of engineering talent in Europe. And instead of warehouses and basic factories, companies like Google are opening research and development
Modern
hubs.
offices.
Now, that said, Poland is still relatively poor.
You can see, I just want to show you this picture. So this is roughly where I was staying. In Warsaw, or Warsaw for English people, you've got obviously the Palace of Culture and Science right there in the middle. That shows the past. And right around it, you've got these big, big office buildings. There's a big shopping centre there as well. And they have the big brands. I think Samsung's on one of them. So clearly, these bigger tech companies are coming to Poland. And you can see it simply from this picture. You've still got the history, but actually the country is modernizing and it is becoming a tech giant. People know IT now in Poland is big. And you can get a really decent earnings and wages from being in IT, for example. Lots of people are educated in Poland because the government just chuck out free education or cheap education. But you can see it simply from this picture, for Christ's sake.
And Poland is still relatively poor, at least compared with most of Western Europe. But the growth so far has been impressive and unusually inclusive. Average wages in the country massively increased, while inequality remained low. And so it's not a growth that would only exist on paper, or only help select few, but it actually trickled down to the rest of the society. And there's one more area outside of economic growth where Poland has been getting a lot of attention lately, and that's its unprecedented military buildup. Historically, Poland has some good reasons to be a little paranoid. Stuck between Germany and Russia, it has been invaded, partitioned, colonized, and stripped of its independence time and time again. And even though today it's in NATO, this historical memory is still there. And while most European countries were taking their peace dividends, Poland has kept military funding at one of the highest levels in NATO. And
how does that... So, okay, when Great Britain, Royal Britannia and all that, was sailing the seas and conquering and taking over all these other countries, it was obviously a rich country, okay? Now, and we spent a lot on military, I get that. But surely does spending a lot on military not affect your country in a negative way? Because you're spending it on military, you're giving money to other countries rather than necessarily keeping it in your own country, because the amount of weapons and tanks and stuff that are probably being bought from outside the country, correct me if I'm wrong, so you're basically spending money without anything coming back. So, it's not money that's being spent on growing the economy. It's not money spent on housing and things like that. So I don't understand. Someone please help me here. I don't understand how spending money in improving the military helps the country, other than protecting it, but not financially, obviously.
After the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it went into an overdrive. It announced that in just a few years, it will increase its military spending to 5% of its GDP, higher than any other NATO member, double the size of its armed forces to 300,000, and buy thousands of tanks, fighter jets, and other military equipment. And before the end of the decade, Poland plans to have the most powerful ground forces in Europe, in what would be one of the most ambitious military buildups in modern European history. Now, that being said, what Poland has achieved so far is impressive, and what it plans to achieve even more so. But it's yet to be seen if all that will actually happen. Despite its successes, there are some significant risks that could kill the entire Polish miracle, and not everyone is so bullish on Poland's future. For a long time, demography has been considered the #1 threat, as around 500,000 people have left the country in the last 30 years. But now it looks like Poland managed to reverse this trend. In recent years, it has seen a reverse brain drain, as Poles and people with Polish heritage living abroad have started coming back to the country. And
I can only say from a UK perspective, Brexit was an awful decision for the UK. Honestly, why would you leave this large union of countries where you've got these trade agreements and you're helping each other to then being a small country on your own? It's ridiculous, and having all the paperwork, and it's ridiculous. But that's potentially helping Poland, because the UK has a lot of Polish people living here, because they come over for work. They'll quite often do the jobs that the British don't want to do, even though they're highly educated. But now some of them have had to go back because of Brexit. And actually, are we now at a time when it may be potentially becoming more prosperous, depending on what job and career sector you're in? It may be actually more prosperous now being back in Poland. That's the question. So actually, maybe Brexit has massively helped Poland and not helped Great Britain at all. It's a disaster.
since the country took in over 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees, the demographic trends are looking much better. And so there are really two major risks. First, while the growth has been impressive, Poland has not actually avoided the middle-income trap completely. So far, it's still massively reliant on foreign investments, and although tech centers are being opened in Warsaw, they are set up by foreign companies, rather than by Polish ones. And while that brings jobs and growth, once again, there is a limit to how high you can grow, since most of the profits will always end up leaving the country in the end. In order to break into the big leagues, you need your own domestic giants in sectors with high added value, and Poland doesn't have that, or at least not yet. But the far bigger risk is of a completely different nature, and it concerns a part of the Polish story that we haven't touched on yet. The thing is that Poland is a deeply, deeply divided country, so much that we can almost talk about two different Polands.
So many
One
countries
liberal
are.
and progressive, and the other deeply conservative and religious.
So many countries are now. Look at the UK. Since Brexit, especially. Wow, there is a huge divide. There is the centre left, and then there is the right. And I can't even say working class and the rich anymore, because some of the working class think the rich are their mates. But so many countries are, and I get it. With, for example, Poland, yes, religion may come into it, as they may be a little bit more conservative, but I don't necessarily agree with that statement entirely, that this is just a Polish issue, because you can see so many countries are so divided at the moment. It's insane.
Like in the US, the two Polands are finding it increasingly difficult to coexist together, and surveys show that both sides are highly suspicious of each other, intolerant to opposing views, and increasingly refusing to compromise. And for years, the current conservative government has been criticized by the liberal opposition for supposedly bending the rules in order to stay in power.
It's not conservative
and it has
anymore.
had a growing beef with the European Union that's threatening to cut Poland off from EU funds as a punishment for not upholding the rule of law. And the thing is that whatever side you cheer for, the end result is bad for both, and for Poland in general. The country needs both parts of the population to
Stadium.
coexist and work together, and it needs the EU if it wants to be truly successful. And if it doesn't manage to do that, the Polish miracle will be over soon, before it has really started.
Interesting video. What I would say is, it is important to be a part of the EU. Really is. Poland is a part of NATO. That's brilliant. No matter what people say, Brexit has been bad for the UK. So many people regret voting to leave. Farmers, for example, oh my God, they're suffering. You hear the stories constantly of the farmers that can't even sell their produce anymore. They can't even sell it because there's so much paperwork and just legislations to deal with now, and it's a nightmare. And actually, this video is from a year ago. Hopefully, I'm able to give slightly different information um, than I did a year ago. But I just think, yeah, Poland needs to stay in the EU. Now, obviously, Donald Tusk is back. I cannot accept this nonsense from some comments saying, "Oh, he's just a German," all this nonsense. Oh my God, oh, he's just EU's puppet and all that nonsense. Get a grip. Get a grip. I'm sorry. Get a grip. Um, you know, it is better to work as a larger unit than being on your own. Poland, some people moan about how Poland suffered during the war because, oh, they weren't supported, oh, they were left to their own, Well, now you're not, so stop fucking moaning. You got Europe with you. You got Europe helping you. You've got the funds from Europe helping you grow. Don't then get rid of them and say, oh, no, we don't want you anymore. There's a reason why you're partly where you are now. Yes, I get that sometimes it feels like economically it's still not great. I get it that inflation of products has gone up and wages haven't necessarily kept to the same speed. But that's the same everywhere. That's the same in the UK, for Christ's sake. And we're seen as a rich country. But I do think Poland is improving. If you go there, you'll realize it's not that image that it said at the start of the video, that Eastern Bloc. It's not like that anymore. It's a developed country. And I've really noticed that from going, like I said, from being in Poland and then being in Tirana in Albania. Both were in a similar situation, both under communist regime, and they look so different today because Poland is growing. It is so much better off than a country like Albania, who was in a similar situation, but stuck with, unlike Poland, what it's saying here, stuck with people that are taking all the money, stealing all the money, basically, the corrupt people, the corrupt government officials. Poland is in a good situation. It's getting better and better. Um, you know, it's hard to realize because sometimes nostalgia is an illusion. It's not real sometimes. Nostalgia, sometimes it always feels like it was better back then, but it's not really. But I think Poland's in a good place. I do think it's in a good place, and I love coming. I love visiting. It's a beautiful place, lovely people, great food, great history, great culture, great scenery. Everything is awesome. There are obviously some negatives, but I love it. Make sure you go to Charlie and Rob on YouTube and you can see we've done like nearly 25 vlogs in Poland from different cities. And there is more to come. There are still plenty of places. Turin, Łódź, Lublin, etc. that I need to come to. The Tetra Mountains or Zakopane. I do plan on coming when I get the time. But check that out. Link down in the description below. If you want to support the channel, the easiest thing you can do is like and subscribe. Or you can become a channel member. And that will help me, allow me to explore more, come to Poland more. But thank you so much for watching. Give me your thoughts. As long as it's nice and calm comments, I'm happy. I don't mind a debate. In the comments, do it. And I'll catch you next time. Do widzenia.